Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 8th installment of my Gran Turismo 7 or Gran Turismo Sport, whichever turns out to be more of a complete game, wish list of the top 30 vehicles, which I've curated out of obviously the thousands of cars which you could say that you actually wanted on the game. Now granted, there are far more than 30 cars which I would love to see on Gran Turismo, and many of the cars which I would like to see are cars which other people would as well, no doubt. Vehicles like the Porsche 918, Porsches in general, the LaFerrari of course, the McLaren P1. I'm not a huge fan of those cars, but it certainly would be nice to have them on the game. These 30 though are, for any who are new to the series, the cars which are my absolute most wanted models. So many of the cars in this series are not obvious choices. Some of them are very obscure, but all of them, as far as I'm concerned at least, represent bringing something new to the table. They're not just another car on Gran Turismo for the sake of it, like the dozens and dozens of Skylines, S2000s and MX-5s. These are genuinely usable models, and they're not necessarily just race winners. Some of them are just great collector's pieces, and some of them are historically important cars, which Gran Turismo did used to have, but not so much now. Gran Turismo used to place quite a lot of importance on historically significant cars, especially on Gran Turismo 4, with the two classic patent motor wagons and the Daimler motor carriage and the Ford Model T, among some others. Now though, we don't see as many of those cars. The car list has almost become more generic, having the models that you expect to be on there, like the Ferrari F430, the Lamborghini Gallardo, the new shaped Corvette. Not that they're bad cars, again, it's great that they're on the game, but it's very expected. It's lost that oddball flair that used to make Gran Turismo so good. And that oddball flair which, funnily enough, Forza is now becoming known for instead of Gran Turismo, whereas Gran Turismo used to have the monopoly on that. Now this car, in this particular episode, is a vehicle which I know for a fact other people would love to see. It's a car which I'm shocked, to be honest, that isn't already on Gran Turismo. It's such an obvious choice. But funnily enough, it's not on Forza either, which is very odd to me. It's one of the fastest supercars ever made, one of the coolest cars ever made, and one of the most popular supercars in terms of people's opinion of it. I don't think I've ever heard anyone say a bad word about this car. It's either they've never heard of it, or if they have heard of it, they probably really like it, and it's not hard to see why. Now the car in question is the extremely insane Ascari A10. This is a car which is one of the most obvious choices, really, of supercar to have on a racing game. It's essentially a race car with a number plate. And yet, the two biggest colossi of the racing franchises, Forza and Gran Turismo, don't have it. Now, to some degree, you can make a replica of the car on Forza using the KZ1R as a base model. On Gran Turismo, we can't get anywhere near it. There are no Ascari cars. We do have the Ascari circuit, but we don't have any of their cars, and the A10 is the ultimate model that they make. So what does it represent? What does it bring to the table? And is it just another supercar? Well, the car which it came from originally, the base model of the A10, as it were, was a car called the KZ1. Now, Ascari doesn't have a huge amount of models. In the 90s, they had a model called the Acossi. Not that well-known, really, kind of noble-ish in its appearance. Then they brought out the KZ1 in the 2000s, a car which was relatively expensive, about $235,000, but it basically only just scraped its way into the supercar category. It had a 500 horsepower BMW engine, could do 200 miles per hour or thereabouts, and did 0 to 60 in just under 4 seconds. So it was a supercar, but only just, even by the standards of the early 2000s. Because the cars back then in the supercar category were arguably the best it's ever been. You had cars like the Carrera GT, the SLR, the MC12, the Enzo, the Gumpert, the Celine, Koenigsegg, Pagani Zonda. The supercar scene was arguably the best it has ever been between the year 2000 and 2009. And primarily it was between 2000 and 2005 that most of those models came to fruition. And that's the kind of time that the A10 started to come onto the scene. Now, the KZ1 came first. It wasn't a bad car, but it wasn't a particularly amazing car either. It was just okay. At the end of the day, it was just another supercar, something for people who didn't want to buy the more obvious choices of Lamborghini or Ferrari. I admire that. I like cars like that. Cars like Spiker. They do that very well. The KZ1, though, wasn't really special enough to tempt you away. It was just different. The A10 took the basic shape and style of the KZ1 and morphed it into a road-going representation of Ascari's KZ1R race car, which is why the A10 is essentially a race car for the road. Now, it's powered by, like the KZ1, a 5-litre V8 BMW engine taken from the older model M5. That engine is tuned to 625 horsepower, and that's in a car with a 6-speed, race-style sequential gearbox, rear-wheel drive, and that weighs in at 1,280 kilos. Now that makes it significantly lighter than almost any other supercar on the market at that time. That is about 300 kilos lighter than something like a Lamborghini Murcielago. It's around 200 to 300 kilos lighter than an Enzo. That kind of territory. Now there are some supercars that are similar, some that are even lighter, but as a general rule, that's a very, very lightweight supercar. But 625 horsepower doesn't sound that amazing. That's around what you'd expect for a supercar at that time. That's similar power to the MC12, the Zonda, etc. But the beauty of the Ascari A10 is what it could do with that power, because not only was it lightweight, but that sequential gearbox, its colossal amounts of grip and downforce, meant that it could launch off the line and get out of corners and through corners quicker than pretty much anything else on the market. 0 to 60 was under 2.8 seconds. Nowadays, you can do that in a Tesla Model S. Over a decade ago, that was unmatched in the supercar category. The Veyron hadn't really been proven yet at that time. Koenigsegg had only just released the CC8S, and cars in that kind of category were generally doing around 3.6, 3.8 seconds to 60. So this car completely blew all of its rivals out of the water, pretty much everything except for the Gumpert Apollo. And the Gumpert Apollo, along with the Mosler, are this car's main rivals. Now the Gumpert is not featured on GranTurismo either, and neither is the Mosler. The Mosler is, though, featured on Forza, and those cars are pretty much a good way of gauging what the Ascari would be like on the game, so the fact that they're not on GranTurismo either makes it difficult to know exactly how competitive this car could be, or where it would fit in terms of PP. But given its track potential, the low weight and the reasonably high power, I would personally predict its PP to be around the 600 PP level, possibly a bit more, maybe up to around 610, I would have expected. Maybe even 620, but unlikely. When fully tuned, you could easily be pushing over 680 PP fully tuned, and it would be a track monster. At the end of the day, that's what it's designed for. Now, funnily enough, the only racing game that I'm aware of that actually features the Ascari A10 as standard is one of the last games that you'd expect to have it, and that's Test Drive Unlimited 2. Now, I'm a huge fan of the Test Drive Unlimited franchise, but the second game didn't live up to the first. And cars like the Ascari A10, and funnily enough also the Gumpert Apollo, were completely wasted on that game. It's not the game that should have had them. Because at the end of the day, Test Drive Unlimited is predominantly about straight line speed, top speed, and drag racing for the most part. It may not appear to be that, but that really is what it's all about on there. It's about having the fastest car in a straight line. The corners don't mean all that much. The Ascari A10 is not designed for that. It's designed precisely for the opposite. It's designed for a circuit. So you just cannot use it to its full potential on a game like Test Drive Unlimited 2. Whereas on GranTurismo, that really is the perfect scenario for this car. You've got all the racetracks selected through the game. Whatever racetracks we'll get on GT7 or GT Sport, we don't know yet. Possibly some new ones, hopefully. So that is the perfect testing ground, the perfect playground for the A10. It was the fastest car around the Top Gear track for quite a while, I believe. It's no longer, but it was the fastest for a while. And it's still one of the fastest supercars you can buy, not only around the track, but still for that acceleration. There are very few supercars apart from the absolute monster mega cars like the LaFerrari that can actually outrun it. And if you think about it, that's not that impressive given how much more power cars like the LaFerrari have. So it's a real testament to the engineering of the A10 just how fast it still is in comparison to the latest supercars. Now on the game, it would undoubtedly be one of the fastest supercars in the game, because at the moment we don't have very many track-going supercars, like the Mosler, Gumper, Ascari, etc. We have some that are kind of almost there, like the FXX, the Zonda R, the Furai, but still, they're not full-blown supercars. They're in a bit of a no-man's land between supercar and race car. The Ascari would fill that niche. It would absolutely blow away cars like the Huayra and the Veyron around twisty circuits, and in a straight line it could easily take on almost any of the other British supercars, many of the American supercars, and many of the Japanese high-performance cars. Japan, of course, not having as many supercars as other countries. Overall then, the A10 is a reasonably obvious choice, I would say, of supercar for Gran Turismo, but one which, as I said at the start of this video, I am shocked is still not on the game. It's such an obvious choice. And don't be fooled by the fact that it's a track car. The top speed is not bad at all. It can do around 220 miles per hour. So we could even make the A10 one of the quickest top speed supercars on Gran Turismo. As far as price, were it on the game, I would like to see it have a price of between 500,000 and 750,000 credits. It's not really the kind of car that should cost more than $1 million. It's just not that type of supercar. Whereas 500 to 750,000 is pretty much perfect. That puts it head on against the Super GT race cars, and it can compete with those cars. So I think that kind of price would be good. 500,000 I think would be pretty much perfect for the Ascari A10 with a PP of around 610. But that's it overall for this particular pick. And as always, if you are new to the series in particular, be sure to slap down what cars you would love to see above all others on Gran Turismo. Maybe GT Sport, maybe just GT7. And maybe, if you have commented before, what cars you maybe would like to see, but probably don't think will make it into the game. As far as this particular car, I think there's a reasonable chance, a bit like the Cadillac 16. It's not too obscure, but at the same time I'm not overly confident that it would make it in. There is a chance, but it's not a certain chance. But that's it overall for this episode, and as always, thanks for watching.